start again on a different one if we need.
Is it recording right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Clap. Yeah. Welcome to the FALA Upcast, a bi-monthly podcast where we watch movies and talk about them. I'm your host, Elizabeth, and today's guest is Indy.
Hi, everybody. You might remember me from the Cinderella podcast or from the June podcast. I also produce these. Very happy to be back. Very happy to be talking about these movies.
Yeah, thank you for doing all the editing on all these podcasts. Very appreciated. So it has been a while. It's been quite a while. We had the winter break, and then I got pneumonia. So that was kind of a hitch in our podcast. But we're back, and we have a very special episode today because we're not covering just one movie. No, we're covering an entire franchise. So let's talk about Twilight for a second.
Mm-hmm.
As you can see, we have a board. Hopefully you can read the board. But there's a lot happening. And I think we have to start with the root of it all. Stephenie Meyer, the author of the Twilight books.
What a woman. I have a lot of things I could say about her. We could start with some fun facts. She's vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
I myself am vegetarian. She is Mormon. She is also a very interesting lady. Do you want to discuss some more about her and her attributes?
I absolutely do. So she, of course, is vegetarian, and that is noted in her veggie burger self-insert. I think it's the first Twilight movie. Mm-hmm. She's in the diner, and she orders, of course, a veggie burger. Crucial. She's also seen again in the, I think, second to last Twilight film.
Breaking Dawn Part 1.
Breaking Dawn Part 1 at Bella and Edward's wedding. Now, I'm assuming that I don't need to give a plot summary of the Twilight universe. Everybody knows it. We have our lovely Bella Swan and her love triangle between Edward Cullen and Jacob. I don't know what his last name is. Jacob.
It's really not important. Maybe he's like one of those one-name people like Rihanna or Madonna or Zendaya.
Jacob the werewolf? Does that ring any bells? Okay. So Jacob, speaking of him, and speaking of Stephenie, was named after Stephenie's little brother. In fact, I think several of the Twilight characters were named after Stephenie's siblings and family. But I do think it is interesting that she would name a love interest after her little brother. Although, to be fair, when she originally wrote the first Twilight book, Jacob was not intended to be a love interest. So I think we should note that in her defense. But I think, is his name Sebastian? Seth?
Oh, Seth.
Yes. Not Sebastian. Seth, I think, is also one of her younger brothers, I believe. She has like a large family, I'm pretty sure.
Well, she is Mormon.
Well, yeah. I'm trying not to dunk on Mormonism too
no,
much.
I'm not dunking on Mormons. I just historically
assuming. But the first Twilight film was directed by Catherine Hardwicke. And I think she is one of the most notable directors out of the entire franchise, in my opinion, because the first movie has such a distinctly different feeling than every other movie in the franchise.
I have to agree. I feel like it's largely in part because of the infamous blue filter.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a Twilight fan, you know about the blue filter. It is kind of like this like blue-green tint that the whole first movie has. And it just like makes it feel for me like so much like cozier and so much more like an indie film. Like a small project and not like a big blockbuster. Like comparing the first film to something like Breaking Dawn Part 2, the final film in the series, the budget seems so much higher. It just seems like really quickly produced, and it just seems like one of those like cash grabs. But I feel like the first one just has this like energy that's like so refreshing.
Yeah, you can tell in the first one, like it has many notable like flaws, like oopsie daisy moments where you can see like a child running through the high school gym that was clearly just like someone's kid on set that had like ran like in frame and nobody like edited that out. Also the fact that the blue filter, which actually originated from Catherine Hardwicke's movie she directed prior to this, 13. This came out, I think, 13 was
2003.
made 5 years before the first Twilight film. And it has that grungy blue tint, and it is a much different movie content-wise than Twilight. But yeah, the first movie wasn't expected to be something really high grossing. It wasn't expected to be a blockbuster. So there were a lot of things that were left in there, like Edward wearing sunglasses, despite that defeating the whole idea that he can't be in the sun without sparkling.
Right.
Or the fact that the blue tint was put on even their sunny scenes when it's supposed to be bright and warm. You know, it's those things that, like, I think really give the first movie its charm. And I think the first movie also, like, really set the stage for the soundtrack throughout it.
Right. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I have so many of like the songs I've discovered through Twilight that I'm like, I feel a little bit embarrassed by it, because if I want to listen to it on Spotify, I have to have the one with like the new moon cover. Like, I love the song Rosalind by Bon Iver and Saint Vincent, but like the only version on Spotify is the one from the soundtracks. Like, that is how much it impacts me, I feel like.
Yeah, and I don't know how much the fact that the first movie was made to be an indie film had to do with setting the tone for future movies in terms of soundtrack. Like, I think the soundtrack is very consistent. Like, even as they got to be higher budget blockbuster movies, and you can tell there was a shift in where it's more meticulously edited. They have CGI, bigger budgets. Like, all the movies after the first Twilight film were intended to be blockbusters. They were caught by storm by the success of the first movie. They didn't know what the Twilight franchise was going to become at that point. But they did carry through with that soundtrack. Like, it has these same indie artists like featured throughout the entire franchise of movies.
Right.
So I thought that was really interesting. And I think Catherine Hardwicke is like very iconic for that, for really like setting that tone. And she did not, I don't think she directed any of the other Twilight films. I think that was just the one that she got creative freedom on. She got to make a lot of these big choices that you don't exactly see following through in the other movies. So when we talk about Twilight and its origins as Stephenie Meyer, I think it's important to look at her inspirations. Indy, do you want to tell us about the 9/11 to Twilight pipeline?
All right, so this is where the story gets a little bit confusing, but just bear with us here. So, as some of you may or may not know, the band My Chemical Romance, founded by Gerard Way, was created after the incident of 9/11. And Stephenie Meyer took heavily inspiration from Gerard Way when creating her character Edward. And it was kind of what inspired the whole Twilight franchise. I don't really know if you want to elaborate on that more.
Yeah, basically, like, she had this emo boy vision for Edward, you know, and you really see that in the writing. Like, he is so, I know he's meant to be 100 years old, but he is such a 17-year-old. Like, he is so angsty, he is so brooding and emo, and you can, I think I understand the vision. I understand, and I think it's like, I just find it crazy that such a awful event would lead to the birth of a Twilight novel. But, you know, life is crazy like that. Gerard Way was actually like her dream casting. Like, Stephenie Meyer has like released some like cast lists of like what her dream actors would have been for everything, and she was really like hard set on like Gerard Way is what Edward looks like. Like, Gerard Way is Edward Cullen. So I think that's just so funny. And speaking of Edward, I think we should talk about her latest book to be published, Midnight Sun. Now, I think Midnight Sun was written like around a decade ago, and it was leaked like in the mid 2000s, I believe. Like, it was leaked on a fan site. Somebody had like hacked her computer and leaked some of Midnight Sun, I think like the first like couple chapters or something like that. And so out of spite, she decided not to release Midnight Sun for several years, but it was released, I believe, in 2021 or 2020 itself. I think it might have been 2020. But that book is the first Twilight novel, but from Edward Cullen's perspective. So you see the same events that progress in the first Twilight book, but through Edward's eyes. And it really enlightens some things. You get some interesting moments. If you notice the pomegranate on the front, she like frequently uses this like metaphor of I think is it Persephone that like eats the pomegranate and she like goes to the underworlds. Like Hades like tempts her with this pomegranate or something. And then she has to like spend time in the underworld. And like that's the whole thing. So Edward basically believes that he is like Hades. Like he is like like I don't know what the deal is, but like every 2 pages that like mythological story would be referenced in the book. Like it just constantly the pomegranate constantly always. But Edward really sees himself as like a monster. And we also get this tear-eating moment where, so vampires, their anatomy, they can't digest food. Right? They can only digest blood. And we find out like in graphic detail in this book that like if they eat food, they have to like vomit it. Like they have to throw up anything they consume.
That's horrifying.
So there's a moment in which Bella is crying. I honestly can't remember why she was crying. It's a very, very long book. She cries at multiple points, I feel like. But she was crying, and Edward went to wipe away, like, her teardrop. And he, like, looks at it on his thumb. And that's the thing about this book is that you get these, like, pages upon pages of his like dramatic inner monologue where he's like this tiny like shimmering piece of her. Like he is so like brooding and angsty. Like it's so dramatic. And he eats her tear so that a part of her will be inside of him for eternity.
That, I feel like, is so derivative from My Chemical Romance lead singer Gerard Way. Like, Stephanie really just went all in. I feel like that's so interesting, too, is just how much involvement she has in, like, the universe of Twilight. You know, of course, she wrote the initial books, and then she wrote Midnight Sun, and, of course, refused to leak it. But then also her involvement, like, in the films, I understand that she, like, made a lot of, like, creative decisions in addition to, like, being in the actual films, like, having 2 cameos. Like, if you're aware of The Wedding Ring. That Bella gets, that was designed by Stephanie Meyer. Ugliest ring I've ever seen. No offense.
I wish I had printed off a photo of her drawing of the ring because okay, so it was written in the book like that it's like an oval ring with like I think like diamonds or stones in it. Right. It's like silver and like that's like the dream. And I feel like that's a very vague description. Like you could get away with like telling yourself that is not ugly, like if you really want to. So like the costume design, they like came up with like a ring and they showed it to her and she's like, no, this is awful, this is terrible. And so she draws for them what she wants the ring to look like. And I really wish I'd printed out a photo of it because it is the most crude, awful drawing. Like it's just like a pencil and it like looks like a child drew it and it's so awful and unhelpful. And so the costume department like made another ring and like the second ring that they made per her request was like significantly more ugly than the first one. Like so awful.
I want an alternate universe where Catherine Hardwicke directed all of the Twilight films and she had like full creative freedom. Like it would have been such an interesting way for things to go. I honestly feel like the less involvement Stephanie Meyer has, the better.
Yeah, and I just going back to Midnight Sun, though, one more point I want to touch on in this is the length difference between Twilight and Midnight Sun. Like, Twilight is a pretty short book. Like, you could probably finish it in, like, a few days if you wanted to. Like, it's easy to read, very accessible writing, relatively short novel. Midnight Sun, on the other hand, is a hefty novel. Like, it is thick. Like, I got the audiobook for it because I couldn't bring myself to, like, read it in public. I felt, like, ashamed. So I got the audiobook for it, and it was, like, something like 26 hours or, like, something ridiculously long. Like, it's so much longer, I guess, for the justification that Edward just, like, has more thoughts than Bella does. Because you can do, like, scene by scene comparisons. Like one like scene for Bella will be like, I looked at Edward across the cafeteria. We met eyes. He looks so dark and brooding. And then that's the end of the scene. But for Edward, he will have all these monologues like about how like she is so beautiful, but I am so evil. Like I am Satan incarnate. Like I can't go near her. She's so delicate and fragile. Like he just rambles on and on and on. And it's so angsty and it is so brooding and it is so pretentious.
Okay, so just to clarify, is Stephenie Meyer supposed to be like the equivalent to Bella? Did she kind of like write Bella after herself?
You know, I think a lot of people make that assumption because, you know, Bella is like a very like plain protagonist. Like she describes herself as plain. Like she doesn't make any distinctive fashion choices. She doesn't exactly have like a distinct like strong personality, I suppose, in the sense that she's like reserved. She's kind of like awkward, clumsy. She doesn't like do anything that's particularly like shocking. And she does, of course, have the same like physical characteristics as Stephenie Meyer herself.
Right.
But I think it's like fair to assume that like most YA protagonists are like a blank slate for the reader to like insert themselves onto. And I think that's like certainly effective. Like if you look at like it was such a hit amongst like young girls, and like I think it's because she's so like average and easy to relate to. Yeah, it's like it's often clarified that she is like not, or at least she doesn't see herself as particularly beautiful. You know, it's like kind of like plain features. I'm putting quotations around that for audio listeners, like brown hair, like pale skin.
Oh, I get it, Elizabeth. Like, you're just looking at me and describing me now, aren't you?
I'm just saying like she's very like modest in her like appearance and also in her actions. But I think a lot of people do say that Stephenie Meyer it was a self-insert. I think not to defend Stephenie Meyer too much, but I think that is like a rule of thumb for writing like YA like hit novels. You know what I mean? Is to make your protagonist really easy for like young teen girls to relate to and see themselves in.
And I feel like in the movie adaptation of the book, I feel like Kristen Stewart really pulls that off well. I personally have not read the books. I don't know if I ever will, but I feel like she really encapsulates that like teen awkwardness. And I have seen so many people hate on her. They're like, go girl, give us nothing. But like, I feel like she does a good job portraying Bella. Like, it's not supposed to be this like dramatic Shakespearean acting. It's just like a normal person.
Honestly, I think if you read the script and the directions given and the books, like I read all the books in like the 3rd grade or something. I honestly think the actors did like a pretty good job in like playing the characters. Like I think Kristen Stewart is actually like a phenomenal actress, and I know that like Twilight isn't like the best showcase for that. She does get hated on for her role in that movie like very frequently for it being like quote unquote awful acting. But if you look at her most recent film Spencer, in which she portrays like Princess Diana, I think she's a phenomenal actress. Like I really do. And I really do think she was pretty true to who Bella was as a character. And I think that's the interesting thing about Midnight Sun though, is you get to see Bella from like another perspective. Like from her perspective, like Bella sees herself as like so clumsy and awful and like embarrassing herself constantly. But when you see her from Edward's perspective, you get to learn about like things she wouldn't think to mention about herself, like in her own like perspective. Like he gets to know about her favorite books, that she likes certain types of music, you know, that she's like an avid reader, that she's really kind to everyone around her. Like I don't think she's like an awful character like she's made out to be. I think you're just seeing it through the lens of like how she sees herself as an insecure teenage girl. You know what I mean? But I think I'm also reading a little too deep into a love story about vampires and werewolves.
Right. So going off of like that casting choice for Kristen Stewart, I think that we should talk about the issue that was the casting for this film.
Absolutely. Specifically, Indigenous actors. So in the first movie, obviously Taylor Lautner is white. And I think a lot of people mistake him for being Indigenous just because he's like tan. He has like darker features, but I mean, his family is white. Like, I don't know his whole like DNA or his whole like extended family, but like he is not Indigenous. I'm like pretty sure about that. Like, if you see his parents, like it's like a white family. And actually, the role was offered to an actual Indigenous actor who's done some work with Disney Channel. I'm like totally forgetting his name right now. But he had the issue of, I'm not going to cut my hair for this. Like, that is something that Stephenie Meyer made the very poor choice to write about, like with her werewolves. Like, she has this logic of like long hair as human would make your like wolf form have long shaggy hair, which is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because we're already like accepting, like we're already suspending our disbelief that like a human can transform into a wolf.
Right.
Like, we are already accepting the fact that like physics has kind of like gone out the window, like magic is involved. Like, why would hair length be the one like defining characteristic that is passed on to your like wolf self?
Right.
Like, that's so ridiculous. And I think like it was in such poor taste because like long hair is like such an important part of Indigenous culture. And so many like Indigenous people are not going to cut their hair. Like, it's like part of their culture. And it's like a way to show your culture and celebrate it. And for her to like ask Indigenous actors to have to cut their hair is such a awful request, especially because wigs are used on like almost every other actor. Like, so many of the actors wear wigs when it's not even necessary.
Right.
And I don't know if an Indigenous actor would be comfortable with wearing like a short-haired wig, but I think that option should have at least been like given to these actors. I don't know what the deal with that was. And in fact, in the first movie, Jacob, some of his friends were actual Indigenous people, and then they were recasted. Those actors were replaced with like other actors in the other films so that they would have like short hair.
Yeah, I feel like not only is that lazy writing for the books and for the script, but it's also just like, you said it, we're already suspending our disbelief. People wear wigs. You can make variations from book to movie, and no one's going to be like, oh, but Jacob has long hair here. Why doesn't his wolf have crazy long hair? I feel like no one would really nitpick that detail, and I feel like it's just kind of like an excuse for her.
Yeah, I feel like it's the whole logic of like having them like cut their hair. And the thing is, like, I don't like the way that Jacob, he has this like glow up, like this like makeover where he gets like super buff, like super like masculine. He like cuts his hair. I don't like the fact that like making him like palatable and like attractive is also stripping him away of some of his like defining native characteristics. Like, I think that was done in such poor taste, and it doesn't even carry through because there is a female werewolf, Leah Clearwater, and if you look at this picture, her werewolf looks exactly like, I'm pretty sure it's either Jacob's or Seth's werewolf, and they both have short hair. So the hair length is exactly the same, and her hair is like roughly my length hair, maybe like half an inch shorter. Like, it is not like short hair. Like, it's still like fairly long. So the logic doesn't even carry through. Like, if you're going to make that bad choice, like, at least stick with it. But I feel like it seems like almost intentionally disrespectful to Native people. And especially taking into consideration that, like, this is like such rare like Indigenous representation in YA novels and in like popular media to have like Indigenous characters as love interests and that sort of thing. And then to make that like poor choice, and also to make the poor choice of like seeing like Indigenous like people of color and then being like, oh yeah, werewolves, like they turn into dogs, like equating them to animals. And there's so many lines like given in it where they're like called dogs or like called animals. And I think that's done in such like poor taste. I think it's like an ignorant choice to make on her part.
There's just so many other things that she could have done with this story, but the fact that she went with that is like really questionable. And also, I haven't read the books, but I do believe that Jacob is somewhere around like 16 years old.
Yeah.
So to really see that like quote unquote like glow up moment is just, I feel like a little bit untasteful.
I do think we should talk about Jacob and Bella's, like, age difference, because I believe he is, like, 14 in, like, the first movie, and then he might be 15 or maybe still 14 in the second one, which I guess it makes sense. Like, she had no romantic interest in him for a while, and it was just like him pining after her. But like, he is like quite younger. Like, when you're like a teenager, like that difference between like 14 and 17 is like kind of a significant one.
Right. It's a lot different than like 42 to 44.
Yeah. Like, it's like you're looking at like a junior or senior in high school versus like a freshman. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think like it was a little weird how sexualized he was, considering how young the character is.
Mm-hmm. And then just some of like the poor choices that he makes like later in the films, like kissing Bella without her consent, and like not picking up on like her being like, I don't want you like to be close to me in this way, and then him just like not respecting that boundary, I feel like is just poor choices on so many levels.
Yeah, and especially to be writing, like, the thing about the werewolves is that they're supposed to have like short tempers, like they're supposed to be like lashing out. Like, one of the other like werewolves, he like had accidentally like scarred his wife across the face in like a fit of like rage, and like it's like portrayed as like, oh, he can't help it. And I think that like again traces back to these really questionable choices being made about how you write people of color. Like, to, I don't know how intentional that was on Stephenie Meyer's part, but to have characters seen as like violent men and having them be the characters, like the only darker skinned characters in like the franchise, is just such a bad choice to be making. And speaking of bad choices, I think we need to talk about Jasper and the fact that she chose to make what is supposed to be a good character we're supposed to root for a Confederate soldier.
There is just so many different things that she could have done. If she wanted to write a character from the Civil War, just make him from the Union.
It is so simple, and there is no like defining thing about him being a Confederate that like would make it important at all. Like, it's just the fact that he's a soldier. And so, like, the fact that he's not a Union soldier doesn't make any sense.
She could literally have done, like, Command F, find and replace, and replace the word Confederate with Union. But no, Miss Stephenie Meyer had to make Jasper Confederate. And I don't really feel like, in the movies, we don't see any of his growth. We don't see him, like, for all we know, he's raging racist.
Yeah, I mean, like...
Oh, sorry, but he's an empath.
Right, that's the thing too, is like, he is not supposed to be like a questionable, morally gray character. Right. Like, he is supposed to be like a good guy we root for. Like, his whole power is that like he sways the people's emotions around him. Like, he can like sense how they're feeling and impact it. So like, he's like not like portrayed as some like awful character. Like, so the fact that like that's the character she chose to have like an awful backstory is so weird. It's such a bad choice. Such an awful choice. I think, speaking of awful choices, let's talk about the pro-life propaganda in the Twilight franchise. Do you want to start us on that?
Well, Rosalie, in Breaking Dawn Part 1, when she finds out that Bella is pregnant, there's some talk of people being like, oh, like, you shouldn't keep this baby, like, this baby's gonna take all your nutrients and it's like gonna kill you, and or, you know, like, it's just a bad idea, there's so many things that could go wrong. But then Rosalie sweeps in with the all babies matter.
Yeah, it's just like,
I guess
you can't kill your baby, Bella.
It's a baby. Yeah. And just like that, really emphasizing, like, Alice is kind of like the opposite side, and she kind of brings that perspective of like, hey, it's a clump of cells. And then Rosalie's like, no, it's not. It's my little niece.
And I think Rosalie, like, throughout the series is portrayed as kind of like a little questionable, like, not always great character. Personally, I like don't hate her that much, but like she is written to be like kind of like mean to Bella pretty consistently. So I think like if they had gone in a different direction, that discussion could have been had. But like the way it works, like I think Stephenie Meyer wanted to tackle the idea of abortion, and she wanted to bring in the perspective of like women who are infertile and can't have babies, and that was Rosalie. Right. Like you can't have babies as a vampire, and she gives this whole like tragic thing like, I've always wanted to start a family, I've always wanted to have a child, like you have this opportunity, Bella, how on earth could you give this up? And then you also have like Edward being like, hey, like Bella, this baby's gonna be bad for you health-wise, like it could kill you, like please don't like sacrifice your life for its life. So she wanted to bring in like two different like abortion arguments of like infertile women, like, and then also like women who like their pregnancy would be detrimental to their health,
right? And they like wouldn't elect to have the pregnancy.
Yeah, it just wasn't done well. It was done in a way where like having an abortion, even when in Bella's case it would have been like literally necessary to save her life, was like portrayed as something evil, like killing your baby. Like it was literally just pro-life, like pro-life arguments, like a pro-life propaganda. And then like Bella, of course, like only lives through the pregnancy because she is turned into a vampire.
Right. So she does die.
She literally does die because of this unsafe pregnancy. So it was just questionably done. And I do think that probably likely stems in her Stephenie Meyer's Mormon beliefs. But this at least brought us to the animatronic baby, which I'm almost glad we didn't lose because Chuck Esme is so iconic. Now, you might not recognize this animatronic baby here because she is actually not featured in the films. She was nicknamed Chuck Esme, as in the combination of Chucky and Renesmee, right. Lovingly by the cast, because this was like an animatronic baby that could like turn its head, blink its eyes, move its mouth. It was like this weird like puppet animatronic creepy little thing. And the actress of Rosalie, Nikki Reed, was so terrified. Like she was the one that had to like hold it and like act with it and be like, oh, what a sweet little baby. But it is like the most terrifying thing ever. And they, for some reason, didn't want to use a real baby because they wanted to like portray the fact that the baby's only like a few hours old, but it looks like a toddler. You know what I mean? Because like,
why not just use a slightly older baby?
They wanted to like, I don't know, bring in some sort of like supernatural characteristic to it because I guess it like has weird aging properties and it's like a freaky little thing. But like the animatronic baby was actually so horrifying. Of course, Nikki Reed was so scared she could barely hold it. She couldn't deliver her lines. Like it was like so terrifying. Like if you see the behind the scenes, like Nikki Reed was terrified, and the animatronic baby would like swing its head and like stare directly into the camera. Like it was so terrifying. And they actually like they didn't even end up using it. Like they spent all these like thousands of dollars making it, filming it. They put poor Nikki Reed through that, had to like carry that thing and act with it and act like she loved it. And then they decided it was so horrifying that they would just have to CGI over it. So we don't actually see this animatronic baby in the movies. What you see is CGI.
I mean, thank God we don't see that animatronic. Like that is scary.
I know, but even for like such a large budget, like I think their CGI wolves are like pretty good, honestly. Yeah. Like I think the CGI wolves were done pretty all right. But the baby, the CGI baby, I kind of wish I'd printed off a picture of it, but the CGI baby is like also awful. Like they were just making it slightly less awful.
Right. And like I just really don't see the point. I feel like it's such a waste of their budget. Like if Catherine Hardwicke had directed these films, I wonder like what decision she would have made. Like I feel like she wouldn't have blown all this money on this baby that they weren't even gonna use, doesn't look realistic, looks quite frankly terrifying, and then just to like scrap it, I feel like it's such a waste.
Yeah, I think that's like the difference in the choices they made. Like, they had this huge budget because it became like a blockbuster franchise. You know what I mean? So they could spend all this money on these crazy CGI fight scenes. They could spend all this money on whatever else they wanted to do. There was so much CGI in the last few movies because they were just like breaking the box office. Really. And I think like over time, like obviously Twilight hype died down, and then we had like a renaissance, a Twilight renaissance in 2020, if you will. And I'm pretty sure that's like around the time Midnight Sun was released. Like Stephenie Meyer probably like saw like, oh my God, people love Twilight again in like a campy, ironic way. And so Midnight Sun was released, and I just like forgot to make this point when we were talking about it earlier. But in Midnight Sun, what I thought was interesting is we know Edward can't read Bella's mind for some reason. Like it's like justified as like, oh, her brain just works differently. And then Edward can't exactly read Bella's father, Charlie's mind either. He can only see like vague images in his mind, but he can't like read his thoughts. But what I thought was so funny is the fact that for like the years that Edward lived in Forks and Charlie also lived in Forks before Bella came and before he like began being like, why can't I read this girl's thoughts? He just accepted the fact that Charlie didn't have thoughts. Like he literally says in the book that he always just assumed he was like a simple man. That Charlie was just kind of slow. And it doesn't make sense because he's like a sheriff. And he's like, I just can't get over the fact that Edward like never really thought that much of it. Like, oh, guess he's just stupid.
I think that that's such an interesting way. I wonder if he ever, like, in the universe of Twilight, would end up telling this to Bella or to Charlie.
I think it's so
because,
funny.
I mean, he marries her daughter. He calls him Dad in one of the scenes. I mean, in an ironic way, but nonetheless. So to have him believing that Charlie just doesn't have thoughts.
I think I also want to talk a little bit about Charlie and I think her name Renee. Renee is Bella's mom and dad. They are like so interesting. Like you can tell that Stephenie Meyer wanted like the YA trope of like parents that aren't really involved. Because obviously like romance with like a bad boy gets like complicated when you have parents being like, why are you dating this weird, mysterious, brooding man? You know what I mean? And why are you like gone all of the time? So she wrote the most like absent parents ever. Now, I think Charlie in the movies is so lovable. Like he's so funny. He's such an iconic character. Like he's sweet to Bella. He like has all these like funny scenes where he like just hates Edward and it's hilarious. But like in the books, Renee and Charlie are like awful parents. Like Bella has to cook for Charlie all the time. Like he doesn't like cook food at all. Like he doesn't take care of himself. And Renee is like such a neglectful mother. Like I think like it's like honestly kind of really sad. Like it's not written in a sad way, but like to see like how absent they are from her life is like upsetting. But that like I guess was like her cop out of like having to like have absent parents so that she can like go off on all these vampire adventures, I guess. But I don't know. They're like awful parents.
And I feel like the way that Bella treats Charlie in the movie, specifically I'm thinking of the first Twilight film, is so horrible. And because he's like such a sweet parent, like in the films, it's so sad to see her be like, I can't stay here with you. That's why mom left you. Is such like it makes you just really dislike Bella, and we do know that it's just because like she's trying to protect him, but I feel like it just makes me feel worse for him.
I know.
And then the fact like in part one, breaking down part one, when she's just like refusing to see him because she's like pregnant but she can't let him know, and she's just like pretending that she's sick, and he's just like wondering where she is. Just really makes me feel so bad for this man.
Charlie goes through so much because Bella has like these months of screaming nightmares like every night when she has this breakup with Edward, and he's like, this is not normal. Like, why are you so obsessed with this teenage boy? But I do think at least film Charlie, delightful character, and I think the actor for him was so good. Played the role so well. And I want to talk one more bit about Catherine Hardwicke in the first movie. So the first movie gets these two monkey-related lines. I just noticed on the sticky note over here, I have Monkey Man in exclamation points, and I think we need context for that. So there's like a scene, the baseball scene, right. So iconic. Everyone knows the baseball scene. Rosalie calls Emmett, like her boyfriend, "That's my Monkey Man." So funny.
But that's not the only
only monkey-related line. So Robert Pattinson is a bizarre man. He hated the Twilight franchise so much. He hated acting in it. He thought it was so stupid. Anyway, he would like frequently make such interesting choices. So he was given the choice between like a couple lines where he's like carrying Bella through the trees, and he was given like I don't remember what the other lines were, but they were like fairly normal, where he could be like, "Hold on tight" or whatever. But he goes, the line that he chose, which I find it interesting that Catherine Hardwicke even put it like in the script at all. Like, I don't know what the writers were doing writing all these like monkey nicknames in there, but he tells her to hold on tight, Spider Monkey. As he launches her through the trees.
As Bella's lullaby is playing in the background, which slaps, by the way.
Yeah. The soundtrack for these movies, incredible, down to the originally composed music for them. But I thought that was interesting. I don't know why the actors had that much like creative freedom in like picking their lines. And I don't know why Monkey was like their cute couple nickname, but
I have so many lines from the Twilight franchise that just swirl around in my brain. There are like so many, not even from the first one, like the classic, it's the fluorescence when Edward's trying to lazily describe why his eyes change colors. We also get the "you imprinted on my daughter" scene from Breaking Dawn Part 1
her
or 2.
After the Loch Ness Monster?
Classic. La push, baby, la push. How you liking the rain, girl?
Where the hell you been, Loca?
Oh, so good. So many classics. And I feel like for the longest time, I remember first watching the movies and being like, that's stupid. Why would I ever like Twilight? The more you watch it and the more you get invested into the universe, the less of a joke it becomes. Like, I watched the first movie and I'm genuinely like excited when I hear like all the motifs of like Bella's lullaby. I'm like, yes, like this is what I live for. And they can just say whatever they want and I'll just accept it at this point. Like, I feel like I no longer am like super critical of a lot of the choices that they make.
Such a distinct writing choice. Like, they really made strong choices on the dialogue. Also, this is so like inconsequential, but it's like the little things regarding the first movie again, because I think it's like probably the most iconic out of all of the movies in the franchise. You know, Edward and Bella are like biology partners, and they're like doing this microscope lab, and of course, you know, that's the scene everyone remembers because he's all like,
like, trying to hold himself together.
He's trying to like, and like if you read Midnight Sun, he's like having these like murderous fantasies the entire time. Like, he's like thinking of all the ways he wants to kill her. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties, but I wanted to talk about the microscope scene,
right?
Which is, it's such a little thing, but it's something where I'm like, did anyone making this movie go to high school? Because they're doing like the classic, like examining different like cell types. I'm pretty sure it's like the different stages of mitosis or something.
Yeah.
And they are like, Edward's sitting as far away from Bella as possible because he can't resist her scent, of course.
Classic.
And they like repeatedly, like they're checking each other's work, and they're like scraping this microscope like back and forth on the desk, like pushing it, like avoiding each other as much as possible to like look at the microscope together. And I'm like, why are you scraping this like $1,000 piece of equipment back and forth when they are quite literally designed to turn to each person? Like, if you've ever done a biology lab ever in your entire like school like career, you would know that you can just so easily like turn the microscope back and forth so that both people can look, and you don't need to push it all the way across the desk every time.
I feel like so many of the like writing choices for like high schoolers is just so questionable. Like when they're at lunch together first of all, I'm its hard-boiled bag of eggs.
Right.
If you know, you know. If you don't,
I think actually that might have been like a really interesting costuming choice. You know, his like bag of hard-boiled eggs perfectly matches all white outfit.
I guess
from
so.
head to toes.
I guess so. But like just the way that they even talk to each other, or like the weirdness of like their gym class and their graduation ceremony. There's just so many aspects where it's like, you know, okay, school isn't the main focus of the book, but you could try to fill it out a little bit more. It's like how, I don't know, just the writers must have been homeschooled.
I can't really think of anything more to say. What are your like closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are that I actually do quite enjoy the Twilight cinematic universe. I have watched it, I feel like a few times, several over. And also, it just happens that whenever I'm at a hotel, I've been at like 2 hotels, and each time we turn on the TV, there's a Twilight marathon, which is very weird that somehow Twilight has made its way back into my life. You know, it got put on Netflix, so it's expected that it's gonna get like more hype. But it's just kind of like everywhere I go, and like I feel like it created like a resurgence of like this YA genre, people watching the films, people reading the books, of course Midnight Sun helping that. Like the fashion is making a comeback, the soundtracks are making a comeback, and it's all just like, I'm here for it. I like it. I think it's really fun. Despite some of the more questionable choices Stephanie made, I feel like overall I really like these films. I'm not even embarrassed to say it. Well, I am a little bit. But what are your thoughts?
I wish it wasn't so problematic.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yep.
Like, I don't think either of us can endorse the questionable decisions that were made in the making of these movies. But it is like a problematic fave of mine in the way that it is just like so... It's so unique.
It's like the Wendy Williams of the movie series.
Like, I feel like it really like birthed a whole genre. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there was like romance, that sort of like YA trope, like fantasy novels. Obviously that existed long before Twilight, but after Twilight and the success that it brought, like you see so many like vampire werewolf romance novels and movies come out afterwards. Like it really like made way for the genre. You know what I mean? Like it is it's such a distinctive franchise. Everyone knows it. And I like think it's really fun to watch. Like it's entertaining at the very least. And obviously I've read all the books. Like I know too much about it. That is, I probably know more than I should, but it has a place in my heart. You know what I mean? I read it at such a young age. I feel like it like left lasting effects on my developing brain. You know, it rewired my neural pathways, if you will. So I don't know. I at least have some sort of a love for it.
Yeah.
You know? But I don't know. Thank you so much for watching. This is a little bit of a long episode, but I think we tried to keep it concise and relatively short. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.